Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's Thrive in China Roundtable, where we are talking about how to employ talent in China with or without an entity in China. Why are we talking about this subject? Predominantly because, at least I'm hoping, within the next 3 to 6 months, there will be changes in terms of border restrictions, quarantine regulations in China, which will allow more flexibility for people to be able to expand into the region, but also to second expatriates and to actually hire people. I already am starting to see that within the last 2 weeks, where there is this influx of foreigners that are being seconded over, and also people hitting the green light button to actually recruit and hire individuals in China. So the next probably 5 or 6 topics that we're doing in the Thrive in China Roundtable will be around talent, employment, social insurance, visas, housing fund, and whatnot. So if this is really pertaining to you, then please do join us and watch the videos I'm recording for the next 5-6 sessions. So today we're talking about how to employ talent in China. And I just want to start off with a case study. I always think it's nice to hear war stories before we go into the nitty-gritty details of getting educated. So this is probably one of my favorite case studies because ultimately it truly highlights the ignorance, the lack of knowledge of a lot of SMEs that come into the Chinese market. So this is the case study of a German SME who incorporated their subsidiary in China, and they actually decided to hire as one of their first hires a senior accountant who's going to help them develop a budget forecast, help with the implementation of the charts of accounts, of the operational guidelines, internal policies, etc. And then they started this relationship. And mistake number one was actually taking a contract template that they had from their Hong Kong subsidiary and utilizing that for China. So that was already mistake number one. But as the relationship moved on, and because they were in a business center, and again, to save costs, they were in an internal office that didn't have any windows. After a certain period of time, this employee started to complain consistently, asking for more vacation time, asking for an increase of salary. And mind you, in all of this, the employee was still on probation, and the business was just getting started, okay? Now, after 7 months, the GM, who was based in China, decided to let go of the staff because of the negative attitude and just the feeling that if they were going to start hiring the second person, which was actually their intention, was to add on to the team, that the negativity around the attitude would just go on to the rest of the team members. So they said, let's start with a fresh plate, find a replacement, and then hire the next second, third individuals that were going to be done. And what this GM did, foreign GM, having had experience in Hong Kong, having relocated to Shanghai, they basically did what they did in Hong Kong, which is you go in on a Friday at 5 p.m. with a severance check, and you pay the severance check and you say, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Here's the door. And prior to all of this, they did not consult with a payroll agent, with a labor lawyer, with nobody. Lo and behold, come 5 p.m. comes the termination, and it became a disaster where the employee lost face, was in complete shock for having been terminated, and started to threaten and blackmail. And unfortunately, at this point, the GM could not call anybody in regards to what do I do now, right? In this situation, if this were to occur to you, the step would be actually to call the police, to come to the office and to help with this type of negotiation, or at least have your lawyer on speed dial and make sure they are readily available to discuss. What happened in this meeting in the end was that this employee lost face, complete shock, threatened, blackmailed, refused to give back equipment, refused to give back the keys to the office, refused to leave the office. And the negotiation went to the extent of actually she asking for a large sum of money. In the end, it was 70,000 RMB to be paid in cash. Otherwise, she wouldn't hand anything over. So long story short, this was paid out in that same evening. And in the meantime, over the weekend, this staff member did start calling clients, bad-mouthing the company and its actions and whatnot. So it was not a good aftermath. And you have to imagine, this is an SME, just started in China. They are in the startup phase, and this was the first person they hired, the first person they fired, and they didn't get the advice needed. What I want to say by this case study is that you don't have to go through this mess, okay? If you are planning on employing people in China, you need to have a knowledge base of what you can and cannot do. And most importantly, if a staff member does not fit well within the team, or you feel they don't have the right attitude, aptitude, skill set needed to perform the job, don't hesitate to rock the boat, but get advice first on how to terminate them and how to terminate them properly. But obviously, it all starts off with the foundation of how can I actually employ these people, okay? So let's start really from the beginning. The title of today's episode is How to Employ Talent in China with or without an entity. Step one is finding the right talent, okay? So ultimately, what you can do is use job search portals like 51job.com, chinahr.com, jiaopin.com, chinajob.com. However, you will find that for many of these job sites, they will require, if you want to sign up with them, actually use the platform, you will be required to submit a Chinese business license. They now tend to only want to work with Chinese companies that are actually registered in China. So you might find that if you're trying to find talent before even having a subsidiary in China, you can't work with these portals because you don't have this business license yet. This follows on to, if you don't have an entity in China, your last resort might be to use recruiters and headhunters based in China to help you do this recruitment search. Don't underestimate the value of recruiters and headhunters. They have a knowledge base on salary guidelines, how to do the employments, how to find the right people for your organization. Please, please, please don't underevaluate that. And they can also help you with the negotiation of the salary packages. Alternatively, if you don't want to pay for recruiters and headhunters, then obviously you can use chambers of commerce that are locally based in China. You can also use LinkedIn, WeChat, other social media platforms to find and recruit people. The only thing I will say on finding the right talent is everybody prepares a job responsibility list, which is all well and good. I think you do need to have a job responsibility list. However, when you are starting up in China, you will probably find that the job responsibility list for that first person is going to be so broad and ultimately very overwhelming because you're hiring somebody to do multiple jobs, right? You're hiring somebody to not just do sales, but to help build this foundation, create operational guidelines, everything associated with building up the business. So you need somebody who's flexible, somebody who's willing to pivot, somebody who just doesn't want to sit behind a computer and plug in numbers, but somebody who really is willing to do multiple jobs and be flexible enough to do it. My philosophy on this, and this is my tip in regards to finding talent, is it's all well and good creating a job responsibility list, but I would almost create an output list. What do you want this first staff member to achieve within the first 12 or 24 months of being employed? Because this will then give a very clear guideline to people and might actually become more of an attractive link to people to show this is the output, this is what we want you to achieve, these are the KPIs, these are the objectives, these are the goals. We have to figure out then what is the job responsibility, but basically this is what we want you to achieve and do. You've got to make sure that your expectations are not overwhelming or not daunting, otherwise you won't attract anybody. And you have to be very, very quick in the recruitment phase in order to be able to find people. Okay, make quick decisions. If you're making the decision to hire, make the quick decision to actually choose a candidate because the process for recruitment is very fast. So do your research, study salary guidelines, understand the output, understand what is your budget, how much are you willing to spend? And in the back of your mind, always remember, salaries aren't cheap anymore in China. Salary levels, especially in places like Shanghai, Beijing, and the tier 1, and even some of the tier 2 cities, are comparable to those in the Western world. Okay, so hiring a head of business development, the salary range is going to be very similar to somebody who's based in Germany, in the UK, in the US, etc. So keep this in the back of your mind. All right. And like I said, try to focus on the output. What do you want this person to achieve within the first 12, 24 months of being on the ground? What I would also recommend, and this is more for step 2 in terms of the recruitment phase, in terms of picking the right candidate, is having a project in place. So let me go through a little bit of picking the right candidate, right? Resumes are provided by candidates, or they're also provided by headhunters, recruiters, etc. You might even see resumes on the LinkedIn profiles of some of the candidates. Take resumes with a pinch of salt. You've got to verify a lot of the data during the interview phase. And if you are hiring for senior management staff, I would highly recommend doing a background check, i.e., do they have references from previous employments? Are you able to contact these previous employers to have a conversation about these employees? Do your background check, okay? The second point is observe their demeanor. Now, obviously, the roadblock for most people in terms of employment is the fact that nobody can do, or nobody is willing to travel into China and have face-to-face interviews. Nobody's willing to pay for the flight tickets that are exorbitant right now, go through 10 days of quarantine to be interviewing people. Most of the time you're doing it now through Teams meetings, Zoom meetings, etc. Don't hesitate. 1, observe their demeanor during the interview. And I would almost say interviews. Meaning if you like somebody in the first round, interview them for a second time, interview them for a third time, interview them for a fourth time. This will give you an understanding over a 2-week period. How are they behaving? Are they getting more confident? And how is their demeanor changing over time? In a lot of instances, it is going to be you trying to convince them to work for your organization. You need to entice them. Yes, they have to entice you as well. But nowadays in China, it really is a matter of you having to entice them to join, participate. And it's not just about, do they like your company and your background? It's also, what are the targets? What are the goals? What are the objectives? What's the vision of the company in China? And my philosophy is, if your gut instinct is telling you within the first 10 minutes that this is not the right person, don't continue the interview. Just be brash and cut it off straight away. Don't force yourself to have a 20, 30, 40-minute conversation with somebody if honestly there is no language, there are language barriers, or there's just no synergy between the two of you. Just end it, leave it, get rid of that candidate, move on to the next one. One of the things that I highly recommend during the interview phase is to screen for aptitude, attitude, and language capabilities. Test for this, okay? For the aptitude, which is the skill set, what skill set are you actually looking for? What technical knowledge should they have? What kind of educational background should they have? And make sure that in these interviews, you are testing their aptitude, whether it's actually physically giving them a test. We've done this with on the financial side with candidates doing actually test runs on SAP knowledge levels. They come into our office, they have to sit there for 1 hour and do an SAP aptitude test, basically. Remember that all of these tests and checklists are for you to evaluate candidates based on the skill set that you're actually looking for. If you're looking for sales managers, BD managers, understand who's in their network, because that's why you're hiring them. It's who's in their network, who's in their ecosystem, who do they know? Get names of companies. They might not want to reveal too much, but you can always get a name or two to understand if that's the right fit for you, for your own clientele. Attitude is only something you're really going to understand over a series of conversations, okay? Even when you meet somebody face to face nowadays, I wouldn't just do one personal face-to-face meeting. I would do several, because you want to understand what is the attitude of these individuals that you're recruiting, to finally understand who has the right attitude, which for me correlates to who has the right attitude for the vision that you want to accomplish in China. Okay. Again, your first hires in China should be visionaries. They should see where you want to bring this company. They should be flexible enough that they can do multiple jobs and are willing to do multiple jobs. They should be courageous enough to say what are their strengths and weaknesses in doing multiple jobs. They should also be sharing with you ultimately their experiences with working with foreign investors, with foreign managers. What have been their problems? What was easier, a Chinese manager or foreign manager? Why? Why were there these difficulties? What were the challenges? And associate everything around communication, because ultimately the communication is going to be the foundation of building up this business. This first hire, your expectation should be that they are with you for the long term, at least for the startup phase, which could be up to 3-5 years, right? And they need to have an attitude. They need to have the experience of either working with startups, so knowing that they're going to have to do multiple jobs, the idea of building up a company, but ultimately working for a foreign investor or a foreign manager. And last but not least, this is what I do for every single role that I interview for. I give them a project to complete, which is again why usually the interview process is at least 3 to 4 sessions. I give them a project, which is ultimately either a test case. So I bring out a client case study and say, this was the situation, what would you do? Or I would say, when you start in my organization, what would be your action plan for the first 3 to 6 months? Now, why do I say what would be your action plan? Because I also have to have an understanding of what their expectations are from me. What type of training are they expecting? What type of onboarding process are they expecting? What type of acclimatization with team members are they expecting? Who are they going to be in contact with? What is the daily communication going to be like? And what are they actually going to do in those first 3 to 6 months? It's depending on the role that they are going to have. What are they actually going to do? What are the first 3, maybe 6, maybe 10 action points that they are going to do to actually be able to scale and grow your company? Like I said, this is why in the job responsibility list, don't just focus on job responsibility, which can be very overwhelming and daunting for your first hires, but focus on what your expected outputs should be from these individuals. Okay. Once you reveal what these outputs are, then you give this project of what will be your action plan for the first 3 to 6 months. Maybe you will actually learn something in these interviews as well that you hadn't even thought about. Again, it's about the synergy that you're going to have with these candidates. Okay. I just actually spoke with a client of mine who, in the end, hired 2 business development managers through a headhunting agency. And it was very interesting because within the probation period, they let go of 1 already. And it had everything to do with the attitude of this individual. He came to meetings late, some Zoom calls with HQ he didn't even show up at, even though he was invited on. His reporting style was minimalistic, giving absolutely no details on client visits, nothing at all. That after about 6 weeks, they decided to let go of this person who was still in the probation period. And what's funny is that my client, who's the ultimate decision maker and went through the interview process, he actually said to me, my gut feeling in the first round was, this guy is useless. My gut feeling in the second round was also, this guy is useless. And in the end of the day, he needed 2 people. This was the second best candidate he found. And instead of telling the headhunter, no, absolutely not, I'm not going to hire this guy, please continue your search, he just did it. He just said yes, right? Please, please, please don't do that. Follow your gut instinct, rock the boat, make headhunters upset because they have to do more work now, but don't just choose somebody to get the job done, okay? That doesn't help you. It doesn't help you to grow and scale your company. And in addition to that, I would say, if you already have resources on the ground, use those resources in these interviews. Use these people as backups. So in this case, my client already has a head of sales, but didn't involve this person in the recruitment process. And when I said to him, why didn't you do that? He said, well, because the candidate's not going to report to him. And I said, it has nothing to do with who's going to report to whom. It's getting an opinion of somebody who's already on the ground, who can help you, who you already trust because you've developed a relationship with. Use this individual to help you to interview. Maybe they will have insights that you didn't even think about in the recruitment process. So use the resources that are readily available to you, and this could be from third parties, distributors, whomever. Use them to help you during these interview processes if you're having doubt and you just want validation. That's why these experts are there. Step 3 is sifting through the China employment laws. So you found a candidate, your gut instinct is telling you this guy is going to be, or this girl is going to be great. You feel that the synergy is there and they're going to work really hard for you. Now the next step is, how are you going to employ this individual? Are you going to have an entity on the ground in China that's going to hire this individual, or are you going to use a third party like an employer of record to hire this individual? It is important to know what you can and cannot do when you are hiring people in China. You've got to ask for advice. Don't do like what the case study I said did, which is not getting a single piece of advice. Already problem 1 was using an employment contract template that had nothing to do with labor law regulations in China. Number 2, not getting the advice at all about what labor laws exist, what you can and cannot do, what documents do you need to make sure that everybody is protected. And can I just highlight that with the new personal information law in China, this is becoming more and more strict, okay? Employment contracts are critical. We have just had one client, and I have to say the GM is rubbish at administration. What happened? Person started January 1st, 2022. Employment contract was not signed until May 2022. 5 months of no employment contract signed, nobody following up one with the other. In July, this individual was terminated. What did she do? She went to the labor bureau and said, I want double compensation for the months where I didn't have an employment contract. 4 months of additional compensation, monthly gross salary was paid out to this individual because the administration of not signing the employment contracts was not done. And why was it not done? Because actually the GM did not know about this law, that if you don't sign the employment contract, the employee has every right to ask for double pay until the employment contract is signed. So get the advice that you need and make sure when it comes down to the actual employment of the individuals, the administration is done. Now, all employees are required to sign employment contracts in China. The terms and conditions of those employment contracts are governed by the Chinese labor law. Some of you might say, well, if we don't have an entity in China and we just want to sign a contract from our HQ with the employee in China, I want to highlight that these relationships are not legal in China. So if you have an entity in China and you're looking to hire somebody in China who's residing in China, having a relationship that is from abroad, you can do nothing with that in China. Okay, these are very gray lines. You can probably protect yourself in your HQ, but I mean, if the guy is breaching the contract, what are you going to do? He's not going to fly over or pay you compensation or anything like that. You have no control over him in the Chinese market. And maybe for you, this means, well, that's fantastic because it's less risk, less commitment. But how are you instilling an ethos and a philosophy within your organization that you're going to abide by the regulations and do everything correctly and punish employees if they do something wrong? You can't punish them if you have this form of contract. Now, this means that you have two options. One is you employ them by having a subsidiary in China, and this subsidiary hires them, or you use third-party intermediaries, which are professional employment organizations that act as employers of record, hire these individuals in China through their own subsidiaries, and behind the scenes, those individuals are working for you full-time. Contracts have to cover all aspects of the employment, okay? Everything from working hours to allowances and benefits, to social insurance, housing funds, all the way through to whether visas are going to be offered, secondment, etc. Now, in China, there are two types of working hour contracts. There's the standard, which is 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, or there's a flexible working hour contract, which means that you are giving flexible working hours to the candidates, to the employees, meaning that they're going to work overtime or they're going to have to work on weekends, etc. So it's outside of the standard working hours of 9 to 6, basically 9 to 5:30. And these flexible working hours have to be approved by the Labor Bureau. So even if you say to a candidate, actually, we want you to start working from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. because of time zone differences, and we may need you to work on weekends to go to factories or do supplier checks or visit customers, this needs to be registered with the Labor Bureau that they're going to do this. Otherwise, you could get in trouble. As for benefits, it's important to understand what Chinese employees get as benefits and what foreign employees get as benefits. It's actually really not fair in terms of what allowances are being offered. Just keep in mind, foreign employees, when they do get allowances, many of them can be tax deductible. For Chinese employees, it is not possible for any tax deductions when they get allowances. So the allowances are just purely an added benefit for them. If they do get allowances, it should be stated in the employment contracts. And in terms of the length of time of contracts, basically you can have limited lengths of time. So you can have 1 year, 2-year contracts, or you can have open-ended contracts. In the employment relationship, you can have 2 limited contracts, one after another, but then the third one has to be open-ended. Okay. Now, employment contracts are a must, mandatory. And like I said, the regulation is if you don't sign an employment contract, the employee can claim for compensation. Employee handbooks, on the other side, are not a requirement, but I would highly recommend having them. Employee handbooks stipulate your company bylaws. They stipulate the behavior you're expecting from your staff. And most importantly, if employees breach contract, you have guidelines in the employee handbook that highlight that warning letters. If there are 3 warning letters that are sent out, there is claim to terminate the relationship. So employee handbooks give both you and the employees the company guideline on how they should behave, how they can operate, and if there's any form of breach, what are the penalties that are going to arise. Those items are not mentioned in the employment contracts. So for me, I always say 2 agreements are necessary. Employment contract, which is the must. The employee handbook is a very, very, very good thing to have because it does highlight ultimately the operational guideline between employee and employer. Now, if you hire a mainland Chinese employee that is residing in mainland China, then personal income tax and social insurance must be declared and paid. Okay? And I'm saying all of this as a background to you to highlight how you can employ the talent with or without an entity. If you hire foreign employees that are going to be residing in mainland China, they must have a work permit and they must have a residence visa. They must pay personal income tax. And in certain cities, they will have to pay social insurance to the bureaus. Now, all of this means that if you are going to hire mainland Chinese employees or foreign employees in China, they need to be employed by a company that is registered in China. Okay, so again, I want to highlight just with this slide, once again, I'm re-emphasizing this. It is important to note that freelance agreements, independent contractor relationships are a gray area in China, and you will not be protected in China if you sign those types of agreements. Is freelancing legal in China? So again, I'm going back to this point because so many people do this. Technically, it is not governed by Chinese labor law because you as the employer are not registered in China. Okay. It's not forbidden for a Chinese person to be working for an overseas company. But if they are in this employment relationship, then you have to make sure that this employee is still declaring their personal income tax and is still declaring their social insurances and housing fund. And obviously the biggest question is, how can you enforce that when you are abroad? Most of the time, the Chinese individuals will not be declaring it. And this is where it then becomes a liability for you, because if you do eventually set up your own subsidiary, which is what most people eventually do, and this Chinese person is brought into your company, they will have leverage over you, saying that in the first period of employment, they never paid for social insurance or taxes, and therefore back pay has to be paid, which means also then penalties will have to be paid. And as you will then have a subsidiary in China, you are liable for that. So it does get tricky. Now, why would you use an employer of record service? So employer of record service ultimately means that you are using an intermediary to formulate the employment relationship with the candidates of your choice. And there's a service agreement then with you overseas. The actual employment relationship and the liability will befall this intermediary who has the employer of record service that is being offered. Now, most companies that are not yet fully committed to the Chinese market, they don't want to invest financial resources or HR resources, not right, financial resources into the Chinese market because they're not sure how it's all going to turn out, will want to use this employer of record service as an intermediary solution, an interim solution, until they hit certain triggers that say to them, we're ready to have our own subsidiary in China. Okay. Why would you do all of this? Probably because you feel that you need people on the ground to support your business so that you have the ability to start your business, but also to be able to then grow and scale up. Okay, so it's companies that basically want to have on the ground operations, those that want to still test the market and use people to do the market research analyses and exploration. It's those that have project management deals that are going on, so people are there for a short period of time, or alternatively, you've started the incorporation phase, which usually takes 3 to 6 months, and in that period, you need somebody to hire them legally. Okay, so that's why you would use the employer of record service. The advantages, the disadvantages of using an employer of record service is that ultimately, and you've got to understand it from you as a human being, if you tell me XYZ company wants to hire you, you feel very honored. It's, you know, you're changing companies, but you're also going to a company that's probably globally well known and is interested in building up their business in China, right? So it's an honor. And then to find out that actually you're not going to be employed by them, but you're going to be employed by an intermediary, that always throws them off guard. It gives a sense of instability, right? Because you're going to be hired actually by an intermediary, has nothing to do with the company. And you're sort of like thinking, you know, how long is this actually going to last for? Will they actually set up an entity? Doubt is going to run through these employees' minds. Okay, I highlighted here, there's no sense of belonging. There's no sense of stability. So again, when you are drafting the job responsibility list for these candidates, please, please, please outline the outputs. And when you are outlining the outputs, put in what those triggers will be for you to actually establish an entity in China and continuously update these employees on where they are at and where the company is going, to give them that sense of, again, vision, that sense of stability, that they're also being taken care of by you, because ultimately you are the ultimate employer, right? Not on paper, but you are the one that is giving direction, is training, is giving the onboarding process, etc. Okay, so using the intermediary can actually be something that impacts you to have stable employees. You might have higher turnover if you don't share and communicate the vision. But on the other side of things, the advantages of using an employee of record service is that ultimately you are faster into your market entry. You have people on the ground that are supporting your business. You're using an intermediary, so you're remaining in compliance. You're following the legal and HR requirements that are being set forth by the Chinese government. And ultimately, you're saving costs because you have somebody on the ground that's actually reporting to you, but with much less liability, and you're not setting up an entity that you actually have to maintain. But I do want to highlight that the employer of record service is not something that should be a long-term solution for the growth and scaling of your organization in China. This is an interim solution as you are evaluating the market, making sure that at certain points there are triggers where you will set up your own subsidiary. This is just a diagram to show how the relationship works between the employer of record, the client, and the employee, and how then the paperwork flows, and that it's a co-employment relationship in the end of the day. Other things that you need to put on your checklist when you are looking to employ talent in China is social insurance requirements and housing fund requirements. Social insurance and housing fund is mandatory and it is complicated. There are 5 different types of social insurance, plus then the housing fund. It is all actually directed and controlled by the tax bureau, not by the labor bureau anymore. If you do not pay the right social insurance and housing fund amounts, you will be penalized, and be sure that employees are denouncing companies in regards to this. So using the tricks of the trade where you would lower base salaries so that the social insurance and housing fund contributions would be lower. This is a no-go nowadays. Be very, very careful on how you structure this. Something to remember about social insurance requirements is that if you have a company in China and Shanghai that is going to hire people, and actually the person is based in Hangzhou, there is going to be difficulty because social insurance and housing fund is localized in the city of the company. So ultimately, if this Hangzhou employee agrees to be part of this relationship, they will have to abide by the social insurance rates and housing fund rates that are in Shanghai. And there are big discrepancies between every city because every city has a different standard of living. Some cities are a lot cheaper than Shanghai. Shanghai has the highest standard of living. It's one of the most expensive cities in China. So naturally, the social insurance and housing fund rates will be higher compared to other jurisdictions. One thing I highly recommend is that when you are negotiating salaries with final candidates, get simulations so that you have a full understanding of the breakdown of the gross salary of individuals, the social insurance breakdown, the housing fund breakdown, so that you have that knowledge of how to negotiate with the employees and you have a full understanding of what's your total payable as a company, but also what is the net salary then of those individuals. So please, please, please do reach out to providers. We offer this service of doing these types of simulations so that you have an understanding and background. Other things to put on your checklist are in relation to individual income tax, which is why, again, I talk about doing simulations so you understand what the personal income tax levels are and how they're calculated. Think about visa applications, which would be applicable to foreigners, i.e. individuals that don't hold mainland Chinese passports. Think about hukou status. Hukou status is the residency of a Chinese individual in China. It's where their family book is kept. If your company is based in Shanghai and actually the hukou of the individual is in Chengdu, there may be issues in regards to the social insurance and housing funds as well. So a lot to think about when you are analyzing how to employ people in China. Make sure you get the expertise and analyze what are the employment law regulations. How can I actually formulate this employment relationship? Is it through a subsidiary in China, or should I use an intermediary to do it? Understand the risks of doing freelancing agreements or contractor agreements. Think about visa applications, gross salary simulations, so you have the full breakdown. Understand the hukou statuses and the visa applications associated. And then last but not least, this is something that people tend to forget, because from step 1 to step 3, that was already a lot of information that I shared. Step 4 is helping your new employees settle in. Onboarding processes are overlooked time after time, okay? You will find that a lot of people, individuals, will terminate their contracts within the first year of being hired, predominantly because you're not taking care of them and they're feeling completely alone. They're feeling like they're not being listened to, and they're feeling that they can't reach the objectives and goals because they don't have any help to reach those objectives and goals. Because in the end of the day, your expectations of that individual were way too high and potentially not realistic. Onboarding process is not something that happens in just one Zoom call or one Teams meeting. Onboarding process should be the duration of the probation period of the individual. And it should be something that you look at on a daily basis. Is this employee feeling settled? Are they feeling comfortable joining the company? Are we hitting their expectations? Are they hitting our expectations? Are they hitting certain goals and objectives? Are they working too slow? We'll find out, why are they working too slow, okay? Settling into any new company will take time. And I get it, you're not physically there to do this onboarding process, but we need to find solutions on how to do it from remote working, okay? So please make sure that you don't underevaluate the whole onboarding process of the new team that you're planning on hiring, and make sure there is consistent communication with these employees. In 2020, when COVID hit, for some reason, I don't know, sometimes I joke that I started becoming a therapist for a lot of people. I would start getting messages from employees saying, Kristina, I haven't heard from my line manager. I don't know what's going on. Are they going to terminate your services? Is my employment still valid? I've not heard from them for a month, 6 weeks, and I just don't know what to do anymore. It was like people had forgotten what was going on in China, and they had forgotten that they had a team there. It is vital that you consistently have communication with your team members there. Don't make them feel like they're left out. They have to feel like they're a part of the team. So that's the end of today's presentation. If you guys have any questions, and I get we were running through this, there's a lot of information to digest all at once, but if you do have any questions, input them in the chat box. I'm opening the chat box now. I always love to hear what the biggest takeaway was from people that joined. So if you want to type that in as well. If you feel like there was information missing or you would like to know something, again, put it in the chat box. Happy to communicate with you on that. And as questions, I hope people are typing in. Just a little bit of background on Woodburn Accountants and Advisors and what we do. We are a corporate services firm located in Hong Kong, and we have a subsidiary in Shanghai. And we provide all forms of administrative services to help companies structure and maintain and administer their companies and their employees in China. So everything to do from brand advisory, trademark registration, incorporations, all the way through to outsourcing solutions. That's actually what we do. So if you've got any questions about that, or you don't want to talk openly in front of an audience about the questions you might have, you can always email me at Kristina@woodburnglobal.com, and we can have a one-to-one discussion. I'm going to type my email address in here in the chat box so you've all got it. You can email me and we can set up a one-to-one call also to discuss all of the information that went on today, and it would be then specific to your own situation. There's still no questions that have popped in. I'll wait after we stop the sharing, and if anybody does, you can raise your hand. But just to highlight the next topics. So like I had said earlier on, we're going to do a whole series on labor laws, work permits, residence visas, personal income tax liabilities, social insurances, basically to highlight to people, because I see this kicking off now, more and more companies are hiring individuals, seconding staff, and this is going to be pertinent to the relationship and also the negotiations that are going to happen. If you've joined live and you're watching this on replay, you're already registered. For those of you that might be newcomers, register to the community, the Thrive in China community, and every single Wednesday we've got a roundtable event where we highlight different issues associated with doing business in China. I want to thank everyone for joining. And like I said, I will stay on for a couple of minutes. So if you do have questions, just type it into the chat. But in the meantime, there will be a recording and I will be sending that out later today. Have a great day. Take care and goodbye.